This is the IPA FF Endline review, a condensed version for DG Echo. My name is Cristóbal Mingo, and I led the Endline review from MSP towards the consortium. The methodology used was reading hundreds of pages in a desk review, including the proposal of the project, the inception report, reports up to date, exercise documentation, the M&E log frame, and also an introduction talk with the management, followed by a series of interviews with work package leads, which informed a series of topics to explore and validate with the partner countries, which later led to the 22 interviews and 26 surveys. All those points were then consolidated into two presentations, this one and the more extended one with more detailed recommendations. So let's go to the first point. Um, the project, since the first round of interviews, was very clearly a project intended to having people at its core, meaning the project wanted to start by building the trust, the connections first, and from there launch the capacity of improving the knowledge or changing on behavior. And this was very clear out across each of the work package, independent work package interviews conducted, as well as reflected in the partner country interviews, right? It's not only the work package leads mention this point, but also the outputs at that time are also aligned. The activation of multi-level groups, adaptation of the pilots, the tailoring of the exercise to the context. From the partner countries, we have in the quotes, it's reflected that there is space generated for learning, for this trust. And some of the quotes, for example, like the IPFF, connect younger with more experience, it's talking about, in this case, the host nation support in the very country. They were, for example, a country coordinator, which is very experienced in the host nation support, but the younger expert gained capacity to learn on these areas from this very person in his country, but through the project, right? Um, Others mention that even though they might not see solutions at this point, they are much clearly aware of the gaps and the challenges with this quote here. Other quotes are more related towards generating the awareness of issues, um, gaining ground around that, and in a very similar way. We have also the comments that look a bit more at the impact, right? These ones are efficiency and effectiveness. Instead, this one is mentioning that the collaboration would have happened, but much slower with many other setbacks, as well as this one here, also in green, talks about the improvement of the actual cooperation, right? The internal cooperation. This more focus more around the impact of the project itself. That said, understanding that the project successfully tackled this building of network, this human side of the project first, there were some issues, right? And the first one here is that systematically and quite frequently mentioned, there was lack of time to socialize in each of the activities, the workshop, the trainings. Everything was done quite tight. Um, Having sessions that allow for um, space, these breaks in which we can take opportunistic interactions, and get to know our counterparts, right? Not as a quiet space, but working together in a more flexible way, um, would really be appreciated, right? Another aspect is maybe having a bit more clarity in the inception, the start of the activities. What are the roles expected by each of the participants? We have some issues mentioned, particularly the last one mentioned was in IPA schools in Albania, where it was not possible to conclude in the involvement of the schools due to very late clarification of who had to do what. Right. There's a third point here. When I was doing the interviews, I found that some of the experts that I interview were very involved in the beginning or at some point, but then were not continuously involved. They had no idea the project had ended or the purpose of my call at that point. And this is also true for embassies. Embassies were engaged in the beginning of the project, but more engagement should have been continued, probably a newsletter or some other form of keeping them in the loop. One of the last quotes I mentioned here is says that the connections are made to push the knowledge and the information and the awareness at many levels, right? And they expect the change to happen. They have faith in that, but it is not very visible at the start. And this takes us to the second point I bring forward, which comes a bit more from um, a lacking of the project itself, since the project is so much about people, right? Increasing their knowledge in technical areas of each other, of each other's work, and the capacity of each of the people that we meet across the region, right? Um, and also the cooperation approach is super important also to have the clear idea of who met who, when, how, and which area, right? So, although it sounds basic, we propose first to have a clear attendance in a centralized way. Attendance collecting information about the organization, the role, across all and every session. It seems a bit simple, but with enough data and the right questions, we could actually start modeling these social interactions and see who might be a more playing a role that's a node among the network and how the network grows. Another aspect building on this attendance, on this network that we're trying to visualize, is a pre-post assessment done in a qualitative way by the experts themselves. Since we are having experts and experts going into the country, spending time in the countries, we should use their first assessment, their gap analysis, as a pre-measurement, and then use this very same exercises to, with the same measurement tool, of course, have a post measurement, which will allow us to compare before and after against, of course, assessments around the guidance, for example, in EMT, in IPA care, or guidances around forest fire. Um, Thirdly, there is the point more intended towards the GIECO is there's the inter-EU coordination. That means that the consortium itself has the ability to be a testing ground of how all the agencies are talking to each other, how the agencies are working. And as such, we should take care of measuring this very interactions and how effective this coordination is done. Since is the way of looking how those different agencies are working with each other, right? Um, well, in that same line, we can go to the third point, which is the consortium leadership itself. Um, in the first round of interviews around June 2023, the situation mentioned by most of the work packages was that there was issues around the coordination. There was repeated questionnaires, and this was verified also by the partner country interviews. That at the beginning they had multiple activities with a lack of clarity on the project front, as well as a bit of a heavy reliance on the country coordinators to motivate and involve the correct people in each of the institutions, right? Which is their role, but with continuous request for information in a remote manner through COVID, of course, there was issues at that start. Um, That said, the project had a bit of an inflection point. Many mentioned the Tirana workshop as the point when this happened. Others talk about some point between 10 or 8 months behind, in which the project leadership, actually in the consortium itself, took a listen to the criticism and acted back. Right, sometimes this criticism was very harsh, very direct, and they did put their work together and tackled with an increased rhythm and a practical focus for the last 10 to 8 months. During this window of time, there's also mention of improved relationship among those countries and the experts. Uh, Hopefully, I mean, the due to multiple face-to-face activities themselves. Um, Throughout the consortium leadership, and quite related to the point mentioned before, sorry, the consortium leadership should provide a space to test, for example, IT solutions. We're talking about the capacity to have a common space that allows for informal conversations, like a workplace or a Slack that would have access to artificial intelligence and allow to record sessions and get automated reports or summary of those sessions, as well as translations of the points discussed. The following point is a condensation of different areas around the grant design itself. Much of the feedback around the future grants was hoping that they would have less hazard or help to give some time to prioritize the work packages that will be involved in the country itself. Less work packages would be less confusion and more time to focus on the areas that are of interest, as well as having a smaller consortium of smaller countries. This, I understand, it might be opposite to the point mentioned at the start of increasing this network, but the idea here would be to start with a smaller group and then snowball this as it goes along. A third point here is a higher proportion of grant equipment. And this is a recommendation that was already implemented in IPA Care. And we'll see how that one works out. There's a second point here, which we mentioned as exercises from start to end. This is because the exercises were mentioned as one of the most practicals and a place where the all the activities conducted throughout the project saw a place and saw how each of them are related to the others. Not only that, but also work packages and experts involved in the partner countries saw the differences among each of their colleagues, how they worked, and how this put in evidence what was gaps, right? Real gaps. So, yeah, it was super important to have that way of engagement from the start, from the very beginning of setting up the work plan. It could be done through discussion-based exercises like is proposed for IPA Care. So this is also a recommendation that's already kind of in play. And thirdly, it's around the capacity of different countries. For example, countries that do have a very strong capacity themselves, countries that might have a strong capacity in host nation support, or the countries that might have good installations to make trainings. Why not use those capacities and involve them in the leadership itself of the project, making things a bit more complicated in the management side, but it gives more ownership of the project itself, right? And many of the areas that talk about this uh, would would be defined at inception. As you can see, most of on all of these points would require an extended inception phase, right? And that is actually the third point, the fourth point that we talk about here. An extended inception would require around up to 12 months. And I say 12 months, it seems like a long time, but given the regional nature, it would have to be needed, right? It would have to be an inception phase in face to face in country, spending a week or weeks. The work package leads, the local experts, which would have to be hired by that point, giving it those 12 months less time, right? Including the national agencies and spending time together through exercises or discussions to define which are the gaps and getting a consensus on the priorities. This sounds simple now, but when you're working with multiple countries, um, we have multiple solutions, different priorities, and you need to get to a consensus, right? Um, in this project, what was done quite well in the early action, early warning um, around the rivers, for example, um, getting working with a very local level that has to be connected then to the uh, regional side because the rivers are all connected throughout the countries, right? So having that visibility, that dedication will require a longer inception phase. As well as in that phase, there's going to be a setting of expectations, right? Um, Negotiating what we get, what each of the people involved in the project will get, and what they put in will be an intense phase. Um, and in this point, the last issue here is agreeing on a feedback for the selected people to be engaged in the project from the partner countries. Um, a side point here, most countries do not have a formal process in which to give feedback on the selected individuals to take part of the exercises or take part of the workshops, right? And having a way to give feedback to the people that were selected, to see the achievement of what was expected from them, would improve with time the people that were selected on this kind of projects, right? The final point is regarding the sustainability, saying that the sustainability actually starts well before the project starts itself. And this has the intention of taking the sustainability as everyone's role, everyone's responsibility. And by this, I mean, yes, there's a role on the partner countries that need to take the lead on the activities, but as well as before the project starts, make the political space or relevance in some of those areas to get the backing. For example, the modeling of meteorological conditions or the projection of expansion of fire. Those models were brought in the program. Some countries had the capacity and had the space already in place to take those and produce bulletins. Other countries receive those models and don't have a place where them to sit. They should be sitting, right? So um, maybe there's a work that has to be done before the project starts itself. It might be that we would like to, for example, change the legal framework around that. It might not be possible, right? Um, and some experts mentioned in the interviews that it might not be needed. It might need a new MOU across institutions that would allow to share that data or do joint activities, right, in a systematic way. So you wouldn't need a new law for that. Another third point recommended around sustainability is the involvement of VAP individuals. This we're talking about decision makers that could actually help leverage funding for future activities. And when I mention future activities, we're talking about the activities that want to continue despite the end of the project. For example, the TOTs or the IPA schools, in activities in which there's high value, there's a high motivation within the countries, but there is a lack of space or budget for. And with that, we finish the condensed version. Remember, there's plenty more detail on this in the extended version.